First of all, ladies and gentlemen, James Genus and everybody in between, we welcome you. Thank you so much for being here. James is the bass player for Saturday Night Live band, and that just seems so silly to say because you've played with every single musician alive, pretty much. Yeah?
Maybe. I don't know.
Seems like more than most. So I'm going to just go ahead and pass it to you and let you, introduce yourself and bestow upon us your wisdom.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm James Genus. As he said, as Barry said, I play bass on Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live, been doing that for maybe 20 years. Before that, or I can guess I'd do the before, the during, and after, or the beginning and after. I guess I went to school in Richmond, Virginia. I'm from Virginia, from Hampton, Virginia. I went to school at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. I got my I got my bachelor's in music. And then after doing so, I moved to New York, where I went to a audio engineering school called the Institute of Audio Research, which actually was above a great stapler in the jazz world, a place called Bradley's. It was a piano bar, which was on University. Little did I know that when I was going to school there, when I joined the school, and then I learned about Bradley's, and then I started going there myself and checking out the scene for duo and trio and solo piano stuff. After that, I started getting into the scene as far as the jam sessions in New York. Places like the Blue Note and the Village Gate, and kind of found my way into the scene, into the jazz world. And during that time, I auditioned for Horace Silver when I was like 21, 22. And I started playing with him. That was around 88. And during that time, also Roy Haynes, another group, Young Lions group from Blue Note called Out of the Blue. I was subbing for that group. Who else? Cedar Walton, Branford Marsalis. Before I moved to New York, I kind of studied and played with Ellis Marsalis, the father of Wynton and Branford, and well, the father, and who just passed away, God rest his soul, at the beginning of the pandemic. And played with various artists on, in the jazz world. And through that, I was playing with Bob Berg also. And through Bob Berg, I met Dave Pekoski, who I was playing with Roy Haynes. And through that, I met Randy Brecker. And that was the connection going to play with the Brecker brothers and Michael Brecker, and in that scene, with a host of many others, Bill Evans and Chuck Loeb and all those people in that scene. Bob James in 1990, starting then. And I was playing with Michael Brecker up until like around 2000, 2001. And then I got the call to play for SNL. And so around that time, and then I've been doing that since then, and a host of other things along the way. Of course, Herbie Hancock, been playing with him for the last 10 years. And also recorded on the last Daft Punk album. and doing movie scores and recording sessions for R&B, pop, uh, jazz, all kinds of stuff for both electric and acoustic. And that brings us to now.
So listen, I've had the opportunity, James, to be in the studio and hear you lay down tracks, and it's different. It's a different thing for me, and I don't want blow too much smoke, but it's been different for me to hear you lay something down in the studio than it has for almost any other musician. And you have this pedigree and this great wealth of experience with all these different people and all of these different genres and styles. So I guess one of my questions is how do you decide what to do? How do you decide what you like? How do you decide, like, what gives you your own particular voice that makes you such a desirable bass player for people to call across the board?
That's a good question. I think it's kind of how I grew up. I grew up, of course, I said in Virginia, and one of my first jobs was, in high school, I was playing at a dinner theater, doing like Annie and kind of shows like that, dinner theater shows. It's kind of like the small town off Broadway kind of stuff, their versions of what's on Broadway. And so that's how I got my reading together and all that, and different kind of styles. But also I grew up around a lot of musicians who played all types of music. I grew up with the Wooten brothers, Victor Wooten and his brothers, Carter Beauford, that plays with Dave Matthews, another great saxophonist, Steve Wilson, who we grew up together, who's on the scene in New York, and Sam Newsom, who's a great saxophonist who we went to high school together.
Can I just pause you for a second, because I want people to know that Victor Wooten, is best known, and his brother Future Man are best known for playing with Bela Fleck, who
right.
is a jazz fusion banjo player who's also well respected in the bluegrass community, which ironically is how James and I sort of met through people.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I grew up as all the people that I grew up with. Oteil Burbridge, that plays with the Allman Brothers. Yeah. And so all of us grew up just kind of like, not in order to survive, but just to make a living and doing stuff. You didn't have like the opportunities of saying like, I only play this style of music. We had to play all types of music growing up to do gigs. And so I brought that kind of attitude and mentality to when I came to New York, because I always felt like, in all types of music, I'm just playing bass. I mean, it's not as simple as that, but that's, whatever the music calls for, I'm bringing my personality, but playing bass, whether it be acoustic, electric, or any kind of style. But you also have to know the styles too. But so I never had blinders on about different styles of music. I loved all types of music. There's a great quote that I forgot who it was. Anyway, there's only two types of music, good and bad, And so that was my, my thinking, because you can, and I tell younger musicians this also, is that you can learn something from everyone and all types of music, and you shouldn't have blinders on to it, because that just helps you out in the long run, for your career, being able to, if you want to be, like a working musician, or like session musician, or or just a musician to, who wants to better themselves. You just have to be open to everything. You can't just say, oh, I only play this, because you should at least, if you're only playing one style of music, you should at least know something about the other styles. So you can, if you're ever called to do it, you can, bring something to the table, be it reggae, be it country. When I was a teenager, like 19, 18, one of the only local jobs that musicians could do was play in the theme park, Busch Gardens, which is in Williamsburg, Virginia, or Kings Dominion, which is in Richmond, Virginia. And a lot of my friends, musician friends, played at the theme parks. And I played in a country and western band. Victor Wooten played in a country and western band. Future Man played in a country. It was just like, oh, he played in the Oktoberfest band playing like marching drum. I mean, it's just like we just played all types of music, and I just kind of brought that, you know, to my personality and to my playing, and maybe that's why people call me to do all kinds of stuff because uh, you know, for lack of a better word, the ear, a chameleon, not really, but a chameleon that kind of knows, you don't sound out of the bag. It doesn't sound like, oh, he's this guy playing this kind of music, or he's, oh, he's a rock guy playing that kind of music or whatever. It's just like he's James, or he's whoever, variable X. He's this guy, and he brings his personality in to whatever type of music that it is.
I was going to ask you sort of how you balance that with being faithful to sort of the vocabularies of each of the different musics, and not necessarily, you don't want to violate, but at the same time, if you're going to play like yourself, you're probably going to have things come through from the different types of music that you play.
Yes, you bring your own personality into it. I mean, it's all about, listening too. It's kind of like, I might not play these styles of music all the time, but I'm listening to them. I'm checking what what the latest stuff is, or things that catch my ear, or anything like that. It's kind of, I guess I'm being true to myself by just being open to whatever music I like and that influences me. And like I remember the first time I did like a country session, and going to Nashville, and but I knew the vocabulary, but then that's a whole style of like recording, because in Nashville, in the studio world, they basically use they use Roman numerals for the changes, so you can transpose easy. So that was like a new thing to me, but it was kind of like, I understood the concept of it.
Isn't the 7 a flat 7 in Nashville numbers too?
Yeah. And if you get a chart, it's not a chart with like a B flat 7 or an A minor or something. It's like whatever the key that it's in. It's like, it's based on 1 4 5. Based in the key. It's just a generic chart with 1 2 3 4 5. Based on the chord, based on the key, and then you have to read it like that, which is it takes a minute, but it helps along the way. It helped me definitely.
Awesome. And I imagine now you're glad they did that versatility. Now you do have to play every style of music and every given week. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, that just helped. And that's always been my approach. When I first moved here, it was very kind of cliquish in a way where there were the jazz musicians, there were the fusion musicians, there were the funk musicians, there was the R&B musicians, all that. And my thing was like, isn't it just music? I mean, not that simple, but in a way it is kind of that simple. But like I said, you have to be true and honest and learn the vocabulary of it. And I used to go around and check out, the people that were doing it, listening to the vocabulary, learning the vocabulary, sitting with those people, checking out the music, and giving it respect.
I think New York's great for that, because you go to the bluegrass jam, you're going to see Cassie Saw at the jazz jam. You go to the jazz jam, go to the trad jam. It's all the same people trying to be good musicians. People,
right.
Certain people are recognizing the value of those vocabularies and all.
Well, yeah, but when I first moved here, it was definitely like kind of like these people's, yeah. And you shouldn't cross the lines, but I was willing to just, people knew me in different scenes, but they didn't know actually from other scenes. And then as stuff started, melting together, and then people would see me and say, wait a minute, I know you from blah, 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 blah. how come you're playing with these guys? Or what, it was, that's what I was always doing, but somehow they just kind of, melted together. And then now I think, more people are doing that. More musicians now in the scene now play different styles. But when I was coming into the scene in New York, there were very few musicians who played different styles.
I try to tell younger people that like we used to be much more cagey. Like musicians used to be much more sort of guarded about about what they were able to do. I feel like there's much more of a sharing of information in the current era where everybody's like, oh, everybody's going to play like themselves, like, and this information is available, and people starting to realize the value of the information and seeking it and sharing with each other. And it's a different vibe than.
Yeah, but and also, this is like, to get that information back in the day was very hard, and that's why you kind of cherished it. And now it's kind of, I feel like there's no excuse now for musicians because you have immediate access to it. All you have to do is go on the internet and you can look it up and you can see exactly what what you're searching for. And
Yeah.
I believe that the search was so hard back then that people kind of maybe took it in more because they cherished it more. I don't know.
Or
I can't
they
say.
didn't. Or I had a friend who would, he was part of the whole like Washington Square Park, go and play like those kind of folk songs and whatever. And little did he know that the whole time he was growing up, old John Schofield lived right next door in the next apartment in Westmouth, and that
Right.
he didn't know to want to talk to him or to glean from him what now, that wasn't on his radar,
Right. Yeah.
So you got to kind
Yeah.
of, I guess the more you're aware of, the more you listen to, the more you become aware. I just gave a guitar lesson just before you came on. I'm trying to tell people like, I'm not saying it's bad to just play what you feel and what you're capable of without thinking too much about it. But when you hear something that you can't play, then you got to start finding out some knowledge because you have to find out how to get to that thing and then how to repeatedly use it and own it,
Right. The history of, where things came from or whatever, then you can, yeah, then you can better get a more grounded like knowledge of it, because you're finding the source of it, just like we're part of things that are, when you're living in the source of things, that's one thing, but when you're trying to get to something that happened before you, it's good to know, like, oh, how did it get to that point? Then you have to research it, and which I said is much easier now.
Any two things. First of all, I'm wondering if you have the ability to play a little something for us in a couple minutes. Is that
No.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's all
I, 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 I'm literally, I'm not set up for that at all right now.
right.
Um, hmm?
We're happy just to talk to you, but I just no, I was going to say who from like growing up and you told us about your experience at the theme parks and stuff like that, but who did you hear when you were growing up that made you be like, ooh, I want to do that, or like along the way, did you have certain people that sort of told you something about yourself and about the kind of artist you wanted to be?
Uh, I
Oh,
mean,
they're famous people.
the usual suspects, I would say. Uh, Jocko, when I first heard Heavy Weather Report, I was like, what is that? And I used to play guitar first when I started at 6. And then it never felt like comfortable or at home for me. And I just couldn't explain it. But then I heard, because I was just doing guitar lessons and playing my little etudes and kind of learning something about guitar. And then when I heard Larry Graham with Sly, and then I was like, I like the sound of that. What is that? And that was bass, and that kind of pointed me in the direction of bass. And then from that, it was uh, Stanley Clark, and then Marcus Miller, uh, Ron Carter, Paul Chambers, all that, delved me into Train and all, just like from one led you to, because Miles, I first heard Miles with We Want Miles. and then when I was a little kid, and then from that, it was like, well, where did he come from? And then you start investigating, and then you get into, the how Miles came around and how he got to that point, but the bands that came before that, and that opened up a whole nother thing. And then I started going down that, that wormhole, and
So it
and
was
that's basically.
and the jazz greats and that history that really drew you in first. Like it wasn't like you first heard I don't know, Richie Valens or something, and then you were like, oh, music, and then jazz became your aware.
Well, it was like my parents aren't musically inclined, or you know, they really, but they had good albums, good records, and of Marvin Gaye, all the Motown stuff. So I was hearing James Jamerson, like, that was kind of a part of my life, and all the Motown stuff, and then so I had, I guess they would call it soul music, back then, Otis Redding, all that kind of stuff. I grew up listening to that, or my parents would be playing that on the 8 tracks in the car, and or at home, or the reels, or the vinyls. So I was listening to all that. So I guess I grew up listening to, Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack and all that stuff. And I remember the first time that I heard the Jackson 5 Christmas album, and the Jackson 5 album, and Jackson 5 Christmas album is classic. That's a classic. If you haven't heard it, it's a classic album. So I grew up on the Motown stuff, so that was kind of in me. And then I started, as I got older, and meeting musicians or friends that I grew up with, and I used to always hang out with other musicians that were older than me, so they would teach me. I remember the first time I heard Steely Dan and all that, because I had friends that were like really into music, and they would turn you on to all these things, and it's just like I was a sponge, and I was just trying to eat it up. And I had a friend, we grew up together. He's a bass player, Ron Jenkins, and he's playing with Anita Baker, and he played with Cher and all these people. And his older brother, I met, and he was really into straight ahead, but then he switched to like all kinds of music, where he was a heavy straight ahead cat. And I used to go over to his dorm room and just grab records and just have my cassette tape, and I would go to the library and just record all of his stuff. So, but the early years was just kind of, the Motown stuff. And then as I got older, it kind of got into, it kind of, moved its way over into the jazz, because even for Wayne Shorter, the first time I heard Wayne Shorter was Weather Report. And then I found out, oh, gee, he played with Miles. Oh, he played, it was just kind of, oh, he played with her. All this stuff came from that. And that was also my thinking, was like, well, wait a minute. These guys were great jazz musicians in their own right, still to this day. But they went beyond that. They were open to other things than just being that. They were great in other areas of music too. And that's kind of how I wanted to approach it.
Nice. I guess we have Miles somewhat to thank for that, because he really he was like, whatever I want, and just like into his late years, like it just kept getting more and more interesting, kept pushing himself further and further. So,
yeah.
Really, I guess it's a good time to, well, we got another 5 minutes before we should probably open it up for some questions from the keynote.
Okay.
I don't know. Does anybody have any questions?
Jason wrote down his question in the chat.
How do all these other artists and creators affect your own music?
I'm sorry, what was that?
But how did playing with all these other artists and creators affect your own music?
It affected it a lot. And it still does to this day. And I'm still, in the process of working on, some of that stuff, you know, my own project and my own music. I used to play in a, Barry, I don't even know if you know this. Did you? I think you do. Did you ever see me play with the Legion Fields?
Yeah, yo, I live around the corner from Oren. The owl is around the corner from my house. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm at the supermarket recently. But yes, I did. I saw you. I mixed you at Joe's Pub with him.
Exactly. So that influenced me a lot. Meeting him and Jennifer, still to this day, and I think in all musical situations, any group that you play with or any kind of projects that you play with, kind of influence you. If if you go in not treating it as though like, oh, I'm just here to, where's my money, or kind of, it's kind of like, I've always, at this point in my career and in my life, I always try to, the situations that I play in, I wanted to enrich me musically. Be it, Osnoy, be it Elysian Fields,
With him too.
Morley.
Yep. I don't know if I've played with her, but I know her. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I said, it's like music is music, and it's good or bad, and you take good things with it. You can take the bad things of it. Oh, I like this direction or whatever. You take what speaks to your heart, and that's what I've done. So, even with the Daft Punk thing, it was that was an incredible musical situation, and
Tell us about that a little bit, maybe. Tell us like.
Well,
you end up getting credit for all the stuff that you did on that album?
Yeah, well, that's another story. I think I'm credited for like maybe 8 tracks.
Okay.
But I think the process was basically, the process for that was myself and Omar went out to LA to record. Omar Hakim, yes. And it was just bass and drums. And Chris Caswell, who brought us into this session, he's a great orchestrator and piano player or whatever. So he they had some tracks kind of laid down, and some they didn't. They had ideas like cells of like 8-bar phrases or something like that. And if you listen to some of the tracks, some of them are just as I recorded it. So in the process of me recording, I'm thinking, because I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be a vocal tune or if it's going to be instrumental or what. But I was approaching it in kind of a format of like, all right, this could be, because now with Pro Tools and everything, you can. It's not like you're wasting anything. So you can say, all right, this is going to be the A section. This is going to be the B section. This will be the bridge, or whatever. So I was kind of thinking song mentality when I was recording, and we just kind of played, and then they stopped, and then we might have done it again or whatever. But so each track we did like that, and then about 2 years later, everything came out like that. I mean, they went into the lab and cut paste or whatever. And, but they did us like that. And then they did Nathan East and Jonathan. They, so it was like, 2 sessions with, a bass player, drummer on each session, kind of doing like the same tunes.
I see.
And so, so they kind of put stuff together, or they kind of use, like, oh, we like the way that this feels better, or what. So they interchanged everything. So it's kind of a, kind of a weird thing saying, that you solely play. Like some things I know that it's all me. And then some things that's not me, I know some of it is me,
Right.
Because I know what I played, and I know, you know how you play. So that's what I would play,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild, man. It's insight for people who are new to the studio process or who are involved in the studio process but don't realize, that things can be done all kinds of different ways in the industry. Right, they're calling a top player like you, and they're still going to go and they're going to cut stuff up and just have a bunch of content that they're going to draw from, and it's very
Yeah.
impersonal. At the same
No,
time,
no.
you can tell when it's you.
Yeah. But like I said, some of it was like that, but some of the tracks, like the Giorgio track, there's a Giorgio track on the Random, was it Random Access? On the Daft Punk album. And with the Giorgio track, that was from the beginning to the end, that's how I recorded it. So that's like, there's no edit in that. It was from the beginning to the end. As they push the record button, that's what I played. And then they kind of put stuff around it to make the whole tune.
Well,
Same with Omar.
That makes sense to me, having heard you in the studio. Like I said, I've heard you lay down a bass part for a tune that already was killing. And then basically the bass part is a whole new song that just like triples the quality of the recording and whatever. So I know you listen to a performance like that and you approach something as like a whole composition.
Yes, I do.
But
yeah.
There's different ways of going.
No. It's like I usually approach it like compositionally, as I've said before. But I also know that it depends on the producer. It depends on the direction they want to go. Because it might be, I might be thinking compositionally like this will be the A section or whatever. But nowadays, a whole song could be an A section, sure. Or whatever. But I'm still thinking of it in song format, and because that's how I would look at it. And then if I were producing it, and I could sit back and say, oh yeah, maybe that works or maybe that doesn't work. So you can't really say what people are thinking in their heads. So you just kind of give them like different kinds of ideas. Not too many ideas. but then I'm writing.
Evan, you had your hand raised about something?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Hello. I had my hand raised, and Jason was calling on me.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, James.
Hey.
I first of all, I had a session this morning with my bass teacher, Danny Morris, and he says hi. And so I think the first time I saw you play in person was, I think, Tane's birthday at the Standard.
Oh yeah.
With Ravi. And when I saw you perform there, I think I went with Barry. I think we went together. And he was telling me, he was like, oh, we went there because our buddy had mentioned that Ravi was going to be there, and our buddy Aaron brought his horn just in case because he knows Tane. And Barry pointed out to me, he goes, that's James Genus. That's, he didn't know that you were on the gig, but he was pleasantly surprised to find that you were. And he explained to me, he just, we're in the club, so we don't want to talk loud. He's just like, that's he's posting SNL with Herbie Hancock. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the way you approach that gig, you almost wear different faces, different masks for all these different gigs, whether it's on TV, if it's in a little club, if it's in a studio. Right. And clearly your musical history, it's really similar to mine, because that's how I discovered a lot of my music taste through records, and just like kind of like you said, you've always had Motown in your head, and then you find out who played on this, and you're like, oh man, those great players there, and then you listen to Stax records and soul, and it all kind of and then jazz, and then so it's like this great net of inspiration. And I'm curious about how, when you're in the moment and you're making those decisions as a bass player, whether it be who you might be, whose kind of sound you're channeling, or what kind of genre and what kind of feel you're trying to portray, how do you approach that decision making in the moment?
I guess in the moment, stylistically, you have to edit yourself also, because you kind of know what works. So you might, even today, it's kind of like, I might have the chops to just be like, oh, look at me, but you know that's not called for in this music. and then it's almost like you're editing yourself with the information that you have, based on the style of music that you're playing. So it's kind of like the more knowledge and the more information that you have, the better it is, because you make the right musical choices within the music, if that makes sense.
And does that, how does that necessarily influenced by if you're handed a chart and you're sight reading, as you go, versus if you know the tune and you're playing it, like how does that affect how your performance comes across?
I actually thought about doing like a master class on that, or just, because that takes a lot of knowledge also, like making the chart your own. So in a studio session, it's kind of, I will, a lot of times if I'm sight reading, maybe they'll play the chart down for me once, and I'll look at the chart and I will make, little notes about like this here, there's a kick here, there's that here, or whatever. Or even if there's notes written, it's kind of like if you're just reading the notes, a lot of times you're going to have to make it more musical than the notes that are on the page. So I think that also comes with knowing yourself as a musician, and also knowing the style of the music, and like if it's a vocal, if it's like a singer track, or whatever, not to get in the way of the vocals. And sometimes you might need to connect with the drums or something like that. Like a lot of times I use that. I've done a lot of recording with this great singer and composer, Jonathan Brooke. And I do that a lot with her, and her music is kind of like, you kind of have to look at the overall picture, especially with vocal music. And even if you're sight reading it, you kind of have to hear where you don't want to take away from other things in the track, but you find your moments where you kind of like, let it be known that you're there. Or maybe letting it be known that you're there is just the support and the groove of it all, because I think that speaks a lot in itself also. Sometimes you don't have to like, spew out all this information to make it known that you are helping the music, lift to a higher level.
Thanks a lot, James. That's a great answer. Thank you.
I wanted to segue off of that and ask you, like, what is your experience like as a person, being what some people might consider an oxymoron as a superstar bass player? Not that there aren't superstar bass players, but the bass player's job is a supporting role often, and yet you've distinguished yourself. So, yeah, what's up?
Word that one more time so I can take that in.
I'm saying that often the bass player's role is not as, say, a lead instrument or as the center of attention, but is often a supporting role, sort of, not always. I mean, you got your Esperanza Spaldings, and, Paul McCartney was singing too and whatever. But I'm saying it's a musically supporting instrument, and yet you distinguished yourself, and you are what I consider a superstar bass player, whereas bass players aren't usually trying to be a superstar. So I'm saying, what's that experience like for you, like psychologically, emotionally, whatever,
I think personally you have to be comfortable with that, because I feel like a lot of times people, that gets in the way of musicality, like wanting to be the focal point. And I think it's almost kind of like, you have to crawl before you walk, or you have to, it's almost kind of like you have to, because everyone knows when they hear music or when they're feeling it, it's a certain feeling, but they don't know why. And maybe it's going to take them a minute to know why, but once they figure out why it is that they like this music, or they like, it could be also like kind of like, well, I saw this band with this person playing, I saw this band with this person playing. And I'm talking about the instrument itself. So say bass or drums, whatever it is. So man, I like when this bass player was playing, but when this bass player played with them, it seemed like it touched me more or whatever. And they'll ask themselves why. And maybe they'll look at each situation and they say, well, maybe they were playing the same things, but the way that this person approached it, I felt it more. And then from that, it's kind of like, well, why am I feeling it more with him? And then maybe it's kind of like, well, let me see what else he's done. And then it'll be like, oh, I'm still feeling that same way, even in this style of music. So, you know, they take from that, well, maybe it is because of him and his personality. It's not, you know, it's not just a support thing. It's more than just a support thing, because he's bringing more to the table, making this music sound better. And I've heard the music in several situations, but when he's in there, inserted in these situations, every time it seems like the music is elevated, or I feel something special with it. And maybe it comes from that. I don't know. I mean, it's not like I'm patting myself on the back or anything, but it's kind of like,
you're making good points. I mean, and just so I'm clear, I wasn't trying to say that the bass is as a supporting role is lesser or anything like that. And of course, the great bass players distinguish themselves. What I meant was that most people don't notice the bass player, and yet, like you said, they're totally conscious of the bass player, because a great bass player is going to be like a stealth player. You know what I mean? It's going to do something to the music that isn't up front and you're not noticing, but it's still, I usually say the bass player is the most important member of the band.
I do too. It's almost kind of like, especially like in certain situations, because, you know, like say in a trio, he's kind of in the middle of what's going on, and he's he's kind of the rock that holds things together. But people don't realize that. But then, but then they do.
Right.
It's a hard thing to describe, but you know what's going on. But maybe everyone else out there is just kind of, because it's like the drums are flashy and everybody's doing a thing, and it's always like the bass player is always kind of like this guy who's just kind of sit there and it's like solid and da 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 da. But I mean, it's in the music it could be like you're trying to grab hold of the drummer and the piano player or the guitar player and trying to make cohesion of what is going on, because if you don't, it could be all over the place. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about. It's kind of like people don't really know or notice it until you're not there. And I think that's a quality, or that's kind of a thing that I bring to the stage, because it's kind of like everybody has their own sense of time. And if you're in the middle of that, say if you're with someone who rushes and with someone who drags, and you're playing with the both of them, you have to find some sort of happy medium to make it sound like it's not rushing and dragging, to make it sound constant. And that's an art in itself also, because you have to be confident with your time. And everyone has to be confident and have a good time. But I don't think anybody has perfect time. But you kind of insert yourself in the mix with that and try to make people feel comfortable with the time, be it in the audience and on stage.
Nice.
And musically.
I was going to say, plus there's the downbeat itself has a whole life. It starts and then it progresses and then it ends, and like rhythm section players develop another level of nuance and relationship with that, especially playing people and I play when I play bass, it's in a reggae band, so that's all I'm thinking about is like no way making them sit.
Right. No, it's yeah, and then I think it's also knowing. It goes into knowing the familiarizing yourself with styles of music, knowing how the bass is supposed to set in these musical, situations, and making it feel good. I always feel like, a good meter is, if to check the audience, to see if yes, you're doing it for your musicians on the stage, but also your listeners too.
Well, talk to us a little bit more about that, because we talked about that a bunch in our discussion, but from our perspective as sort of itinerant people doing our thing and whatever, you have a lot more experience on the stage. How much are you like playing for the audience? How much, we have this whole thing about like getting over the need for approval and really making sure that you're giving of yourself on the stage, and that you being your own worst critic, or not worst critic, but having the standard set by yourself, trying to do better while still trying to give something to the audience. So what's your experience like with that?
I mean, I personally think, we're all playing for the audience. I mean, otherwise, why are you there? But you're also, playing for the people, on the. It's almost kind of like, especially like when I'm playing with Herbie or whatever. It's kind of like we're having like the audience is let in behind the curtain to a conversation that is going on, and so we might be thinking about the conversation that's going on stage because we're listening and using our ears, and we're going down these different roads musically. But within that, we're also, we're aware that people are there also, and we're trying to do it for them. It's not in a selfish way, because I feel like we know that if we're reaching that level on stage, there's no way that it's not going to be reaching people in the audience.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard. And I've been in situations where it's sometimes, even with Herbie, it's just like sometimes there's so much, not so much music, but people are drawn in so much that sometimes it's not an immediate response to like, oh my gosh, that was like, what did I just experience? Yeah, like, what did I?
Tension, just like speeches, kind of.
Yeah. But then you do that, and then you bring them in with something that because it has to be something for everyone. Everyone can't have the same taste in music. So,
well, Herbie, that's why he did
touch them.
Herbie knows that. That's why he did Rocket and put himself in the pop music world.
Yeah. There's a story about that. We were in Germany, and there's a guy, I can't think of his name right now, but he came backstage, and he kind of told me the story of how he met Herbie, and I was kind of like, well, who are you? And he's like, I'm an artist, and he's like, I'm a visual artist. And come to find out, he had a picture. He had like an 8x10 that he gave everyone in the band, and it was him and Herbie, and it was the guy who did the what do you call it, animatronics or whatever it is.
Oh,
Stop motion.
Yeah.
It's a great video. I'll put the link to the video.
That music video is sick. Yeah.
I know. So this guy, Herbie's manager at the time said, you need to check out this guy. He's doing an art exhibit in London of these like, these mannequins or whatever. They're like, doing these movements and stuff like that. And so Herbie went to go see the exhibit, and they were like, oh, you need to use this in the video. And so that's how that relationship started. And that's how that video concept started.
very
And
cool.
so it was a picture of them when they first met. And I guess it was in this guy's studio where, they had like, his artwork, and they were getting ready to shoot the video. And they hadn't seen each other since they shot the video, So that was back in the 80s, and they hadn't seen each other since the 80s. But that was,
recently.
I'm sorry, what?
It was recently that they reconnected.
This was last winter.
So I didn't
Yeah.
catch that piece. Very cool.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he just came. We were in we were in Leipzig, and he came to the concert in Leipzig, and they hadn't seen each other since the video.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
And so I took a picture of them. I think it's on my Instagram page, but I took a picture of them holding the picture of themselves, like from the 80s.
Oh,
So,
nice.
so Herbie and this guy are holding an 8x10 of them, like, you know, however many years ago, was that 30 years ago, something like that.
Nice.
And that was history in itself. And it's just incredible. I mean, Herbie always finds himself in those situations where it's just like on the cutting edge of something like amazing, you know?
Can I add to that? Because
Yes.
that was also the beginning of something else. Grand Mix DXT hit the world to scratching. And before I knew that, I knew DX, and he used to come hang out with me at the store where I worked, and we used to hang out for like 3 hours. I had no idea who he was. He told me he had worked at Hancock. I did not know what he was doing, but he was my buddy who would come into work and hang out with me. And then the store closed down and whatever. And a couple of years later, I got a copy of the DVD scratch about all the turntablists. And everybody, you know, the Incredible Scratch Pickles, like Louis Kubert, all these people, they're all like, oh yeah, first person I heard is Grand Mixer DXT on Rocket. And I was like, wait, what? That
was him?
yeah, you know?
We did a show at the Kennedy Center last summer. It was the 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing or whatever. So,
oh, not the Apollo Theater.
No.
That's what I thought.
the landing, the moon landing, and so we were with the orchestra, and he was scratching, and we were, you know, it was me and Vinny and Herbie and LeVar Burton was introducing us.
Wait.
What's his name? Jordy, right?
The Nerds. Doesn't he do the run to the Nerds? Like Rap Like Little Old Me Lamar, right? Isn't that him?
And it was, and I just thought about that connection just now, because I was like, at first I was just like, oh, that's LeVar Burton. But I forgot that he was like Star Trek. He was in Star Trek.
Yeah,
but,
that's it.
Yeah.
Jordy LaForge.
Jordy, right? Yeah. And so we did Rocket, and they were showing footage of, you know, of the rocket taking off and the landing and all that stuff. Wow. Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool thing. Yeah.
Wow, man. Well, we have 6 minutes left. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask James about, or you know, any questions, any comments about, you know, what we've just been talking about?
Before he left, Day asked, what are some of the craziest gigs that you have played? I don't know if you answered that or not.
The craziest ones. That's a hard one.
Crazy, and a lot of different gigs, right?
It's a lot of ones. I mean, one of the first ones I thought was crazy when I first moved to New York was like like a drag show. Nice. You know, it's like, yeah, on Houston on the east side. I mean, that's, huh?
Is that Lucky Chang's? That's like the famous drag spot down there. I don't know.
No, it wasn't Lucky. It was like, I forgot where it was. I mean, I knew it was on Houston, and this was like, yeah, like late 80s. And I think that was one of the craziest ones. None too crazy. I mean, as far as that, like, you kind of go, oh, that's crazy. But I just think, you I'm trying to.
In the
One of the scariest ones that I was on was the first time I played with Branford, and that was Jeff Watts and Kenny Kirkland, and we were doing some gigs, and I had never rehearsed with them, and we just went on the stage and played, and I had, I was like the young kid, like, yeah. But at the same time, I was like, oh my God, these are like, legends here that I look up to. And I thought that was kind of like one of the scariest situations. One of the, also a good story also is on the first Brecker Brothers, Return of the Brecker Brothers. The first track that we recorded was Above and Below. And that's a Randy Brecker tune. And we had never rehearsed, never played. And that was the first song that we did, like live. And,
I don't know that one, but I'm assuming it's crazy.
Yeah. It's, for a first tune, it's like, it's, I think it's the first song on that Live in Barcelona too. And,
okay.
that because I had never, Michael, I had played with Randy and done some sessions with him and stuff like that, but I had never played with Michael before. And, it's kind of like the Michael Brecker, and I'm about to, I would go by the studio to just, talk music and, see what the album was going to be about. And then one night I went by there, they were like, okay, let's record. And, and back then you had ADATs, of the music, but it was just like I was listening to it, but we never like rehearsed it or played it, and we never rehearsed the song. We just played, and I was thinking, I was sitting there, I was like, wow, this is unbelievable, and I'll never forget that. Never forget that.
Right. Very cool. With 2 minutes left, I just wanted to mention something personal to you, because you were talking about how funny things happen in the industry and whatever. Our friend Bobby Hawk, Rob, who used to play with Elio, the fiddle player. So he did some tracks recently, and then like 2 days later, or 2 days ago, unbeknownst to him, they were released as him playing on 3 tracks on the new Taylor Swift album. Rob Heck, that's his name, Bobby Hawk.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's how it happens, doesn't it?
You know. But James, we got 2 minutes left, man. I just want to start saying thank you and say how much I appreciate your making it through. I'm sorry I had to be on Zoom, but that maybe made it possible. So I'm very thankful for you working it into your schedule, and it's been very cool to talk to you and sort of glean some of these ideas. It's pretty consistent with a lot of the things that we've been talking about and we've been sharing. So it's nice to hear that things sort of stay. The priorities and the tantamount most important things seem to stay the same regardless of what level you're at in the industry and as a player. And
yeah. I think as a takeaway from me to whomever out there is don't sell yourself short by not being open to other types of music and other situations, because that makes you grow as a musician in so many ways, be it by playing or be it just your musicality. And you just be open to all kinds of things and approach it that way.
Awesome. Well, so thank you again so much. By the way, I'm sure you got stuff to do. It's 1:30, whatever. But I just want to, say that you're welcome to hang out. I think we're gonna have a break, and then we have some classes. Actually, we don't have any more discussion sections today, so maybe
Well, I thank you for always thinking of me, and I'm glad that we could kind of do it, today, and thank you for not being discouraged by, okay, maybe this year, because not being able to come, but you know that my heart was there, and then it worked out this way, and I'm glad.
Well, you've always
Uh,
shown me that. You've always shown me that, so I appreciate. That's why I wasn't, didn't hesitate to call again.
Right. Be safe out there. Man, yeah, for real, everybody. And much love. Yeah.
I hope your family's doing okay, and healing up.
Thank you.